Welcome to Memos to the President. I'm Yuli, and I'm here with my colleague, PJ Maykish. PJ, welcome.
Thank you so much. Always good to be with you.
Thank you. We're launching this series of podcast, Memos to the President, with the purpose that, you have an incoming administration. There's so much to do when it comes to the technology competition.
For sure.
Obviously, AI is the center of competition, as we have said for many, many years, PJ.
We should explain why.
I agree. But before we get into that and talk about the memo we're releasing, I really wanted the audience and the listeners to know who PJ is. You and I have worked together for the last 10 years, many different places. You have served in the United States Air Force for 24 years. And so I just wanted a broader audience to know PJ, his journey up to here, some of the key takeaways, maybe, so far.
Mm-hmm. It's so kind of you to ask, Illy. I wish I could do the same. So someday we should do the same. I want to ask you that. I was a STEM kid that was just looking for a mission. So when I was a kid, I was just trying to find every science I could take in my high school it could offer, and I did and enjoyed that. And I went to this thing called the National Youth Science Camp where they take 2 kids from every state. So I got to meet for the first time kids from around the country. I was meeting kids from Nevada and Alaska. I'd never really traveled that far to see that many, but it was all about STEM for me. But then STEM for what? STEM for a mission. So I was trying to find a mission. I was drawn to the military. My mother encouraged me to get my degrees before I joined, so I did that, got 2, and came into the Air Force, served for 24 years where I was operational. And then when I was not operating, I was doing everything I could to get caught up in tech programs as a PM or an integrator, which is why I'm a 702 area code, and enjoyed that until I met you when we were doing the 3rd offset, which to me was the beginning of
work.
Yeah, good old boss work. It was like the beginning of being able to do tech strategy for a change, right? And we tried to reorient the paradigm in the Pentagon, one of the largest bureaucracies in the world. That was fun. I learned a ton. Working with you. It was fun. And then went back to war for 2 years for ISIS, and then we came back to the AI Commission. I'm grateful that you asked me. I feel like part of serving is that you want your life to always have more impact as you go, right? You want to crush what you're doing, but you want to have more impact. So I felt like I was able to do that. AI Commission was the next one after that. Now here.
The purpose today, PJ, is really to talk about the AGI. But you and I have been doing this for 6 years now with the Commission first and now with SCSP. And I feel like every time somebody said, this is another AI wave, we're going to hit AI winter.
Yeah.
For the last 6 years, it has been anything but that. And I think you publishing the memo on AGI really just goes to the fact that, we will enter a space now and time in which the models and, the AI will get better and stronger and more transformative.
For sure.
And so let's talk about why this is important, why AI is important. Everything you and I have been doing for the last 6 years evolves around this. So why AI?
Yeah. I think you're saying what everyone experienced. It didn't matter where you were. If you were at the hyperscaler labs or you were an academic at Carnegie Mellon, everyone saw these pauses, but those pauses seem to be over. And even though AI progresses in levels, which is why we really appreciate the DeepMind definition, now there's megatrends driving it, right? And so we've tried to identify here the megatrend of the models themselves, the large language models everybody's experiencing that has a life all its own. There are all of these paradigms that are changing underneath it, like no-shot learning, agents with no-shot learning, agents with no-shot learning and memory. And so all of those individual paradigms are combining and also adding to LLMs. But you've always said the strategic lens is the infrastructure lens. That is like the geostrategic game, which is the data centers, the networks, the advanced compute, the energy now, right? And so that megatrend, that is the infrastructure that creates AI, is its own powerful multi-billion-dollar force. And that's just the clinical facts. The models, the advanced paradigms, and the infrastructure are all moving, and they're converging in a way that it's here. Yeah, it's here. So that's one thing. But I also feel like why AI is so central is we've always here, like at the Commission, AI Commission here at SCSP, we've explained there are these 4 big things that are converging. One is that AI itself is a general purpose technology, like mechanization or electrification. Those 2 things combined to create the Industrial Revolution. General purpose technologies, they stick and stack. They stick because they don't go away. Right. Machines are still here all around us, electricity is still here. And they stack, which means they combine. And so then after mechanization, electrification, we had automation in our labs, and then we had digitization, with the internet and the first websites in 1991. Now we have AI. It's the fifth really big general purpose technology since electricity. And so it's that big. It will subtend all of society. So factor one, why AI? Factor two, there's clearly an international competition going on, which we should talk to our audience about. And that international competition is being fostered by the two largest economies in the world. The third factor is that these have massive economic impacts. I mean, when you achieve positional advantage in a general purpose technology, they have many knockoff effects to the macroeconomy. There's one study that said Apollo paid for itself 10 times over, and there's over 1,800 spin-offs of that technology just to create that advantage. And so those who have advantage in AGI are going to have this macroeconomic impact for sure. And then finally, those who are aligning geostrategically, they happen to be single-party unchecked systems. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They're like an axis now.
Axis of disruptors.
Yeah, we called it the marriage of convenience in vision, right? So I think those four reasons are why is AI so important?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right, PJ. I think when you look at this decade, there are two factors impacting the outcome of this decade, but moreover, who's going to set the rules of the road for the rest of the century. And I think the number one factor are the technological trends.
Yeah.
And I think AI there really is at the center of these technological trends. I mean, we talk in our work about biotech and quantum and, the energy and all the other technologies that are really now shaping the future. And so I think the technological trends are really important. The second factors are the geopolitical factors, you mentioned. The axis of disruptors, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But primarily for us, the major concern when it comes to technology competition is really China. So how does AI or AGI really factor into this broader geopolitical competition we are in with China?
Yeah, it shouldn't be left to chance. I mean, I think that's what we see, right? Is that leadership in this technology can't be left to chance. It can't be resigned to pilot programs. It can't be resigned to aiming low. China is outstripping us in ambition. I mean, you've got to admire their ambition in this space. In Beijing, they have BAAI, so there's a Beijing Artificial Intelligence Association there, and they have all their best companies in on that program. They even have one named after AGI. It's called Big AI, and the best companies are involved. And the leader themselves, they've had a plan since 2017 to dominate this space, and so we're suffering from lack of ambition in this space, but that's something that could be changed by this administration in a day.
I think let's talk about the memo, PJ.
Yeah,
I think the first memo is on AGI, and I think the purpose, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, is really to highlight some critical technologies, critical areas, for the incoming administration, and why the next 4 years matter, how we position ourselves. So talk a little bit about the memo on AGI, how you have outlined the memo, what are some of the key points that I think the audience should know about the memo, and then, any other thing that's in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Illy. There are so many good thoughts out there, and we respect the fact that a lot of people are thinking about what should the administration do. OpenAI came out with 5 moves that we admire. They make a lot of sense. What we've tried to do here is to say, there's a simple set of moves to organize to win that a nation might take now while this convergence is happening geopolitically and technologically. And so we basically think of it as winning is a process. So you want to organize to win. You want to fuel that organization. And so even in the NFL, there's a salary cap because it's obviously a competitive advantage, like whoever's spending money here. You don't want to have a hollow effort. And then third, it's time to think about the attack and defend mentality in the AGI space. If AGI arrives and nations have AGI, what does attack and defend look like in that space? So organize to win, fuel that victory, and begin to think, as the Reagan administration did, about cyberspace, about what does attack and defend look like in this space. There's an amazing story from the Reagan era where President Reagan watched this movie from 1983 called War Games. Many of you may have seen it. Some of you may not, depending on what generation you're in. But it was a story about someone hacking into National Command modeling and simulation for nuclear weapons. And the president saw this movie and went back to the National Security Council and said, could that happen? A week later,
Right.
NSC came back and said, not only could it happen, it is happening. So that led to them writing something called NSDD 145 to prepare for the attack and defend era of cyberspace 7 years before there was a website. So that's what this memo also calls for, is we want to be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve in cyber defense like we still feel like sometimes. We want to get ahead of that era.
Right.
And so organize, fuel, and think about attack and defend. It's a simple set of move-out moves in a short memo.
No, I'm with you, PJ. I think generally that the government should organize for these kind of competitions. And I think when you put AI as, a foundational general purpose technology, that the future of the economy, future of our society, future of our national security will depend on, then obviously the government should play a role in terms of how we bring private sector together, because that's where, this is happening, this is really being developed. What kind of resources are required for us to stay ahead? What are the infrastructure requirements for us to stay ahead?
Yeah.
In your memo, you call for moonshots. As you and I have talked many, many times, I'm skeptical about the term moonshots being overused.
It gets overused,
over and over again.
Sure.
But
All due respect to
in
that.
your memo, you call for multiple moonshots to be launched for us to get to AGI. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
And what are some of the key ideas that we have explored for these moonshots?
I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people might feel that way. Other people still admire it. But whatever we call it, the fact is the government in China has more ambition than the government right now in the United States. So we're being outcompeted in ambition. And so vision. Yeah, exactly. So, whether we call them moonshots or not, one way the United States has always achieved positional advantages without becoming a centrally planned economy is to declare a bogey that the government and the private sector can achieve together. In fact, when Apollo was declared by Kennedy, 81% of everything that was achieved to get to the moon the last 3 years, 1966 to 69, was achieved on contract with the private sector.
Right.
So it wasn't a government-only thing. In fact, it was highly private sector enabled. But
I think that's the private sector that was built in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely. No, it spins off to that. I mean, literally, there's one site that says $1 billion of economic value still comes out of Apollo every year. Right. That's rough tracking, but potentially as many as 1,800 different spin-offs from that effort. But it was pure public-private partnership without vaguely saying we should have public-private. We name a bogey, we declare it, the public and private actors come together, unite, achieve it, and then we have positional advantage. I think that's how we work at our best. I think Manhattan's an example of this. Apollo's an example of this.
Operation Warp Speed.
Warp Speed is a fantastic example of this, right? It's the president declares something, the nation unites. There's a U in USA, and we achieve it, and then we have leverage.
100%. Going back to this memo, PJ, you have 3 portions in the memo. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely.
What are some of the moves, as you like to say, that we have to undertake?
Yeah, for Organize, we have 3 basic ideas. And again, this isn't the be-all, end-all, but it's just some easy step out and move and get advantage kind of things you could do. Number 1 is the idea of there being an AGI system in the DC area for a few reasons. 1, you might want central government to have access to a superior decision-making capability that's in close proximity that people could actually interact with. 2, you might have some things where network speed matters, particularly intelligence fusion, those kinds of things. But also the idea that it just brings general awareness to our leaders of what's capable in a system that might be called their own and used. So that's one idea, is if we were going to create some sort of national system, why not here? The third is the idea that if we're going to, AI is software anchored, so you don't have to think of one moonshot. Since it's software anchored, you might think of many. In fact, we've conceived of one for a while called MedShield. That's the cost of a B-2 bomber. So it's not like a massive stimulus program. You might think of several moonshots in AI that could be achieved, but who would declare them? What are those moonshots? And this is where I think a lot of people stall. So in the 1940s, there was something called the National Defense Research Council, NDRC. And the NDRC literally led to the beginning of the Manhattan Project. It was scientists that believed in achieving positional advantages, a small collection of them, including Vannevar Bush. And they led the research that went to the prox fuse, to the radar, and ultimately to the Manhattan Project in 1940 and beyond. So we've imagined a 6-month run of those scientists, a small collection, that could be around the president that would declare what these bogeys should be and go take them down and be accountable. So that's one. And then long term, we've always conceived of the fact that some of these things need long-term attention. And the office of the vice president has developed this ability to look over the next hill. I think in the previous Trump administration was responsible for creating Space Force. That came out of a process connected to the office of the vice president that classified wargaming and led to options for the president when the president took a bold option. We think that that function could ride again, and so that's more of a longer-term thing. So you might think of what does an AGI system for government look like in near proximity? What does it look like to have a small collection of scientists that declare very inspirational moonshots that are achieved with ultimate public-private cooperation that actually result in power, capabilities, and leverage in this era? And then third, what does it look like to sustain a long-term view on that so there's intellectual continuity between administrations and the OVP? Those are three things we've thought about for Organize. We've also thought about fueling. Of course, we have always held that you have to be careful where the government spends money. We're coming out of a time where three big initiatives were launched, the Infrastructure Act, the IRA, and CHIPS. I mean, those are three big moves that are just shy of $1 trillion, right? Those are big moves. So what does it look like in an era where you have to be much more conservative? Things have to pay for themselves. We have to be conscious of our debt. And so we've imagined and did the math going back to AI Commission. What is that amount of money that should be spent to stimulate those moonshots? What does that look like? And then two, what does it look like to have creative financing mechanisms like low interest loans and government-backed loans to build things like infrastructure? So you might imagine something like an XM or an infrastructure bank, since sovereign wealth funds have been a bridge too far often in the United States for the government to own that kind of property. So we're trying to imagine what does creative financing look like so that it's not all pure stimulus and all pure debt. And then the third one is just, again, to get into this attack and defense space. I mean, there has been, since we were in the AI Commission, our good friend Mikhail Rodriguez at MITRE and Ram Shekhar Shiva at Microsoft came together and created the adversarial threat landscape for AI systems Atlas. And the world saw 14 categories of ways you could destroy AI systems. But there is no coherent framework to develop options for the President of the United States to destroy AGI systems if we ever needed to. And, we think if there was an autonomous cyber attack system, the president would want options to take that down, right? State, non-state, for sure. If there was an autonomous disinformation platform sending billions of messages into the United States, the president knew that. The president may want options in this space.
Absolutely.
So there needs to be some sort of framework that way. And then finally, there's at least 9 discourses on protecting AGI advantage. We list them in the memo. And the National Security Council is well positioned to run process to kind of come up with a coherent protect plan as well. We think that is a minimum viable strategy to kind of move out across this presidency, because as you've noted, this is the presidency that will receive AGI, right? And so the question is, do we lead or not?
PJ, I think what you said about China and how this decade will be really decided between us and them. I hate to use the word race, but I think that's what it comes down to, on who gets there first. But can you talk a little bit about one of the efforts we have here, and we just published the report on the gaps. This goes back to the work we have done at the commission, which is, doing a classic net assessment. You and I have worked in the Department of Defense. There's an office called Office of Net Assessment that traditionally does like the military net assessment between us and key adversaries. They did it during the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Most obviously, now they're doing it against China.
Yeah.
One of the key things we have struggled for the last 6 years is how do you do a technological net assessment, right?
Yeah.
What are the factors that you have to look at? What is the methodology and stuff like that? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you have led that effort here for us, and David Lynn just published a report yesterday on the updated version of the gaps or the updated net assessment between us and China. So can you talk a little bit about methodology and how you did it the first time?
First, I'm glad you asked us to do it. I mean, going back 3 years, you asked us to do the first one, and we got after that. And classically, it's difficult for the U.S. government to do a scorecard, but we are a scorecard nation. We want to know who's ahead or behind and why positional advantage matters. In some sense, we're a scorecard world, right? I mean, you look at the Olympics, we're like doing gold medal counts, right? I mean, it's a scorecard world. So the question is, how does a nation scorecard? And that's just step one in diagnosing of a strategy. It's not even the prescriptions, but where are we? And so here at SCSP, we've thought a wise nation would ask questions about the tech itself, questions about the rival, and questions about our own ecosystem. But in government, that can't come together
Yeah,
in
you
one
can't.
place, right?
Yeah.
The IC can't study our companies because it's against the law.
It's shocking to many that
I know.
we cannot do our own analysis.
I'm sure CEOs, like of the companies we admire, would look at us saying, why can't the nation scorecard, right?
Right.
Some basics. But I mean, the technologists and the China strategists and the business intelligence world, so our CEOs, our CTOs, those who know the bleeding edge of the tech, those three worlds don't often come together to do strategy, right? So what we've tried to do is model that a little bit. So we've asked these 21 questions, but the most basic questions are, where is China ahead? Where's the US ahead? So that's gaps. Now, having said that, you kindly asked us to get a little bit more into AGI. So what we did in this memo is we said, lens number one is to say, where is AI today in China and the United States? And for that, we compared the status of these large language models. We compared how much private capital is being attracted into the sector. We compared how many companies have started in this space, where are patents, where are publications. So we looked at that and inductively said, clearly US models look great, but then if you look at publications, it looks like China's starting to gain some nose authority in key areas, right? So you say, okay, that's a toss-up. We added two other lenses in this case to say, since AGI is technically not here, level 3 or 4, you have to use some supposition. So we said, let's suppose you could measure ambition, national ambition in some way. And so we looked at China's national ambitions and our national ambitions. And to simplify, they're defined by a nation that had a plan since 2017 that has something like moonshots that's funded, and a nation that is setting up something like a safety institute and doing pilot programs with a much lower level of ambition. And so if you just compare the relative ambition, plus if you look at the programs in China, namely BAI and Big AI, these are organizations in Beijing that literally have the name artificial general intelligence in their name, with their best companies drawn together in their form of public-private to achieve it.
Right.
So the level of ambition in China,
hiding it.
it's like an open ambition, which you have to respect, right, as a rival. And so the ambition in the CCP is greater than the United States, and that's a shame to say, but that's something I know this administration could change overnight, right? The third thing we compared was infrastructure, which you've always considered the strategic lens, right? Is the nation that's structurally advantaged to build AI systems with more energy, with more data centers, with better networks, with better advanced compute. The basic fundamental elements that make AI, that's the game. And so we compared that and we said, like, China is producing 2 times as much energy as the United States, even though the United States is a net exporter of energy. They can dominate the size and scale of energy they're producing. They're also obviously very advanced in others like solar and wind. But then when you look at data centers, 60% of the data centers in the world are built by US companies. And so using all 3 lenses, where's AI now? Who has better ambition? And where's the infrastructure game going? We said the 2 largest economies in the world, it's really like a toss-up. You can say in one place, the United States has advantages, another place, China has advantages. You could add talent, The talent game in the US is great. We can draw upon the talent of the world, where China has more of a difficult time because it's more centrally controlled, centrally planned. It's a little bit more difficult to get there and study, et cetera. And so, you could compare any one of these sectors and call one ahead or behind. But what we've done inductively is say, suppose this is true and that's true. We suppose it's kind of still a toss-up, even though you can see advantages in both countries. Yeah.
No, as Eric mentioned in the first podcast, this is a dynamic, which I think you always have to remind people that this is not a static competition.
No, it's totally dynamic.
6 months from now, you can clearly say, oh, we're still ahead. I mean, look at just what happened over the holiday break when 2 Chinese models, according to some of the analysis, are outperforming American models.
Yeah, DeepSeek.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is a dynamic competition that you always have to stay ahead.
This is so dynamic that when we produced our AI Trends newspaper, it was 25 November.
Right.
There's 7 things on our board now. Big changes, not little changes in AI that have happened since November, So yeah, it's extremely dynamic. And we just tried to take some structural way to think about who's most likely to lead in AGI. But that's up for grabs.
That's awesome, BJ. I would like to end us with a slightly informal question that I have for you, because I want to ask this to all my guests. I mentioned you served our country. So 2 questions. Number 1 is, I'm sure we get a lot of interns here, people that are well-intentioned. They want to come, they want to serve, and they do an amazing job here at the SCSP.
We've had killer interns.
So first of all, any advice for anybody that is graduating, about to graduate, wants to move to DC, wants to join the government, why they should join the government, why the mission-driven purpose of any of the departments and agencies would fulfill, a young person, desire to do something good for the country. So that's one. And the second thing is, if you have any story you can talk to us from your time in government, something that really was an eye-opening for you, something that you said, wow, today I made a change, or like I saw something that was either good or really, really bad. But anyway, over to you.
So why service, first of all? And you're an amazing example of that. Personally, that's why we should do another podcast sometime and talk about that. But first of all, I think everybody's equal in a lot of ways. One way they're equal is that they're all equally gifted at something. They're all like equally called to something. Everybody's got to figure that out. Like, what are they gifted at and what are they called to? And you combine those two, it's hard to stop someone. Right. And I think when you see people that look unstoppable, it's people that have combined their gifts and their calling and they're rocking. So not everyone's called to national service, but for those who feel it a little bit, I always like to say to my students, to our interns, when we hit the road, because you asked us to go out to other universities and teach.
We have, yep.
Yeah, and thank God for Steve.
We work with 12 universities.
The road with us.
Thanks to you and Steve. And we've expanded the network to 12 universities across the nation.
Yeah, your vision.
We have identified some of the most amazing young people that come work with us. Some of them have joined us as full-time.
Yeah. We didn't even do that intentionally, but we find some people out there really feel drawn to this. And I like to say to them that there's always a place for an expert. So we were them. We were undergrads, and everybody was. You were 19, 20. You know what it was like to figure out, how do I get into the arena from here? Your life unfolds in chapters, but what's chapter 1 and what's the next chapter after this? So I always like to say, there's always a place for an expert, a true expert. I also like to share, your ways matter. So you want to be an expert, but you want to have good ways. And that's another thing that's under everybody's control. How good are your ways? Everybody's still building their ways. I know I am at my age. I'm not done being better, stronger, fixing myself. So I think if someone thinks that I'm trying to master something to get into the arena, there's always a place for an expert. And my ways, I'm maxing out my ways. On a scale of 0 to 10, my ways are at the top. If you're an expert and your ways are good, there's always a place for you in the arena, right? Really important, yeah. And I just think that those who serve, have you ever met anybody who served the nation in some way and regretted it? I haven't.
Me neither.
I haven't.
That's a good question.
I just haven't. Yeah. There might be chapters of your life and you move on and do things.
You're exhausted, long days and everything, but you never say oh.
Yeah, they're not for the weak. Yeah. The jobs you've had some jobs that were not for the weak, But I've never met anybody that said, I regret that. Right. And so you always kind of surf that. But in terms of stories, of service, stories of service, one that comes to my mind is, nobody really talks about it as much in the media. I don't really hear it, but the ISIS war. Yeah. The United States of America, with a coalition, an amazing coalition, it's sometimes gusting 32 nations. And a colonel from all those nations were in my Air Operations Center for the last 2 years of the war, all came together to say, that's uncivilized and we're putting an end to it. And to watch the nations come together and say, we're not going to let, a non-state actor create a pseudo-state and then violate Westphalian norms and crush these people. There were Yazidis who were taken as slaves in that. There were horrors, children that were taken as slaves during that time. So I don't know, one story for me is just seeing that all come together. That was the period of time where the Wagner forces had crossed the Euphrates rivers and got too close to our forces. That happened when under my command in the Air Operations Center, and I remember it well. The Russian Coordination Desk was on the line of my deputies and our AOC, and so we remember that vividly. Of course, chlorine was used on innocent people during that war, and the previous Trump administration said, no, we're not doing that, and we restored order there. Everything that was a part of that chlorine attack was struck in an act of deterrence by punishment, really. And so, to think that if someone's going to use chlorine on villages, and if someone's going to cut people's heads off, and if they're going to take children as slaves, that's a war worth fighting. And that's a national security memory I have when you ask that question, because actually I flew to be with you for the first day of the AI Commission, March 19th. The war ended 4 days later. Right. So that's one memory of why serving matters. Yeah. It's beyond. Yeah.
Really appreciate.
On that note, I want to thank you first for your service. Thanks for your friendship. over the years. And, for those of you that want to read an amazing memo, just to highlight that this is a really big memo on AGI, because as you and I discussed, I think the next 4 years really will define, I think, the rest of the century on, what AGI is, how we're going to get there, and who gets there first. So thank you, PJ. Thank you for everything. And thanks again.
Yeah, Ilya, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be your friend and roll with you. And I appreciate you organizing us and calling us for these things, basically to help this administration.
Thank you.